You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
If you're interested in diving into your own attachment repair journey and earning security, I invite you to sign up for my free video training called What is Secure Attachment and Do I Have It? You'll learn what attachment theory entails, the defining traits of different attachment strategies, and how to see the warning signs of attachment disturbance across different areas of your life and behavior. Not only that, but you'll glimpse the impact this attachment injury may be having on your relationships, career, and meaningful pursuits. This framework is a helpful starting place, giving you the keys to understanding the root problem and an introduction to the reparative path forward that we offer here at Mettagroup. Head to mettagroup.org/start-here or click the link below to get started. Welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It's Thursday, February 5th, 2026. It's 7:36 p.m. Pacific time. And I'm wondering what to talk about tonight, since I'm looking at my calendar and realizing that what I was thinking I was talking about, I've already talked about. So I will ask you whether there was something you wanted me to talk about, or I'll jump into a different topic. What do you think?
I have an idea.
Okay.
I just need to have a look at my notes because I can't remember what it is. Please excuse me. Now that I've said that, I'm struggling to find it, but it will be here. Here we go. I know. It's quite specific to some of your practices, George. I'm interested in when you use the term states, like feeling states, how like there's emotions and then there's things like curiosity or interest, and I'm just curious as to how to distinguish between like what it is that we're focusing on when where does that, it could go out to so many different feeling states. Does it encompass all of them, or just curious about that.
So I can answer that, and there's a question about forgiveness, which I can answer, and there's a suggestion of talking about conflict and attachment, and I think I can actually put them all together into one one conversation. When we talk about a mind state or a view, what we are talking about is a quality of distortion that affects the way that we perceive reality. So if you look at that process, and this is a very particular description of the way Buddhist thought describes the perception of reality. If you were to talk about this in a Western psychological way, it would be, you might even say that this was the description of ego. You have the capacity to sense something and an object that can be detected by that. So a photon of light is detected by the retina of the eye. That's the sensing experience. The body has a lot of different kinds of receptors in it. temperature, pressure, that sort of thing. Hearing, of course, you have the translation of the physical vibration into a signal that the mind can then track. Tasting and smelling are a different organization of sensing. And then you have the awareness of the sensing, the mind aspect, that in understanding the way that we tend to perceive reality, we don't do a uniform scanning of everything and create a neutral perception of what's happening. This would be a Western view of the way that we understand how we discern reality. For Aristotle thought that we do a neutral scanning of everything that's around us, and that we create in an internal working model of what's happening, and that we largely perceive accurately what's happening. 300 years later, Epicurus suggested that if you were in a strong emotional state, it might distort your perception, but it's accurate enough that you can reasonably rely on it. It wasn't until much later that we got into this understanding of how is it that we handle that pure sensing experience, right? In Buddhism, it's always been you take in what's around you based on the selection of mind, and mind is attracted toward the things that you prefer, that give you pleasure, and is repelled by things that you find painful. And so you're necessarily in that process creating a distorted perception of what's around you based on what you prefer, away from what you dislike. Is that making sense? And then the body has this quality, we call it Vedana, of, is the Pali word, is evaluating what's urgent and what needs attention and what doesn't need attention, and is there time for something pleasant. And they've been able to test the brain science on this pretty well. It takes 3/8 of a second to perceive something that's considered dangerous. It takes 1/2 a second to perceive something that's pleasant. It takes twice the duration and twice the intensity for you to perceive something that's pleasant than something that you perceive as dangerous. So we're really biased toward the perception of things that are dangerous, which the evolutionarists think is a way of preserving the body in the face of a hostile or dangerous environment. And you may notice those thoughts just coming up automatically. I was walking Lucy, the dog, this evening, and a woman across the street was walking her giant dog. Lucy's like 10 pounds, off leash. And that immediately struck me as a dangerous situation for my dog. And so I was immediately visualizing all of these, karate moves to defend my dog against the giant monster that was going to attack. Now we should talk about the self-experience and the body-mind activity of you. The witnessing self-experience takes about 1/2 a second to show up. And that's the experience that you're having now, right? Both the self-experience and the unconscious processing. You are conditioned to understand English, and you're understanding the words that I'm saying, but I'm actually not saying words that have meaning associated with them necessarily. My larynx is vibrating and you're hearing a sound. The sensing experience is of the sound. You hear the sound. And then the mind comes along and recognizes or decodes the pattern of the vibration and then assigns meaning to it. The way that I define the words that I'm using and the way that you define the words might be different. And so you're understanding the sound and defining the meaning of it and understanding what I'm saying based on what your definitions are, not necessarily my definitions. Not making sense. And the self is knowing that. But the processing of that sound is not the self activity, that's the unconscious activity of the body mind. When you look at the brain science of that, the self experience is processing 16 bits per second, and the body mind is processing 11 million bits per second. So when we say that the self or the limited identity is limited, we mean it's dramatically limited by what's actually happening. Each of those sense moments, each of those mind moments that you've after they've been evaluated for Vedana, they form a queue, and then you compare them to the perceptual database. And if there's a meaning in the perceptual database that's close enough to that mind moment, then the whole meaning thread attaches to it, and it folds out into conceptual reality, which the mind, which the self knows. Is that making sense? So you're hearing me say a word, and you probably have the self-experience of hearing it as I'm saying it, but I've actually said it a half a second ago, and it took you that long to process it, and you smooth over the time lag so that you don't notice it really. Is that making sense? The way that you can test this is try to play tennis by thinking of what response you're going to have as the ball is coming by you. And you'll notice that you'll be unable to hit the ball because it's already gone by you a half a second before you could think of something to do. So you have to play from the unconscious rather than from the conscious. You have to play from the body mind. You can't play from the self. Is that making sense? Even though that witnessing self-experience is absolutely flawless in presenting it as happening in real time as we're experiencing it. Makes sense? Between the sensing experience and the reality that we make out of the sensing experience is the place where the mind state goes. It's like a filter. It's like an eyeglass, let's say. If you take your eyeglasses off, what does the world look like? And when you put them on, what does the world look like? And can you tell the difference? You know that you're looking at something that's the mind has created and is representing, or are you able to touch into the pure, undefined sensing experience? The only time I've really been able to do that with any reliability is in auditory space, listening to sounds that I don't know what they are, and the process of attempting to define them comes into the self-experience as an undefined sound. Are you familiar with the experience of hearing something but not knowing what it is? And the body-mind attempting to solve it, and it solves it, and it becomes that, and then something else happens, and it unsolves it and resolves it as something else. Once it's solved, of course, it's pretty hard to pry that meaning off the experience. So that what we begin to do is recognize how is that distortion happening. When you're in an angry state, how do you know, how is the appearance of the environment you're in different? So let's say you walk into a room that you're quite familiar with and you are in a frightened state. Does the room appear differently to you than when you're in a joyful state? Is that making sense? And so what you begin to understand is that is the mind equanimous, and so you're getting a pretty straight translation of the sensing experience into your perception of what's happening. If you're looking around the room and everything is in sharp focus and everything is defined and you can understand it, you're in the conceptual reality. You're not in the sensing experience, because visual experience is really a narrow band of focus and detail in the center, and everything else is not so in focus and there's not so much detail. The edge, so I'm holding my hands out, this is the edge of the visual field for me, side to side. But it's really only the center that has detail and focus. And can you track that? notice when you're in conceptual reality and what the sensing data is. The activity of Tajapanati, which is the Pali word for reflecting back on, it's actually reflecting back on conceptual reality, comparing conceptual reality to the sensing experience to make sure that you're in an accurate representation, which is really the way that you illuminate a mind state. This is the sensing experience, and this is what I've made, and it's distorted from what I'm perceiving. Now, the distortion could be beneficial or it could be afflictive. It really depends what it is. You would say, if you're holding the metamind state, that the distortion of conceptual reality is a positive distortion, right? Everything looks beautiful, so you're oriented toward everything looking beautiful, and you respond as if that's how it is, even though it isn't that way. It's distorted by the holding the mind state or the view of loving kindness. Is that making sense? And you can cultivate beneficial mind states that actually make it easier to respond to the conditions of the world. You could cultivate a compassionate mind state so that you'd be more receptive to holding the experience of suffering. In Buddhism, of course, compassion is narrowly focused on suffering. Is that making sense? So, what I ask you to do then in attempting to understand conflict and attachment experiences is to recognize the mind state of attachment and the mind state of exploration. These are two really important things to understand. When the attachment system activates, it deactivates the exploration system. When the exploration is activated, the attachment system is deactivated. It's one of the ways that you can track your balance and your capacity to solve problems. If your attachment system is activated and your exploration system is off, it's very difficult to solve things that would be easier for you to do if the exploration system was active and the attachment system was off. The attachment system activates, and it causes you to seek proximity to an attachment figure who you would find reliably protective. Now, this then, of course, brings up that whole memory stream of what is protective and what is your expectation that somebody will reliably protect you. And those threads go all the way back into early childhood and the experience you had in being responded to by your caregiver. What happens in that process, so the capacity to sense has contact with an object that can be sensed, a consciousness of the sensing experience that forms, it's evaluated for urgency, that forms a queue of sense moments that is then compared to the perceptual database. If the sensing mind state, if the sensing experience has a match in the database, then that whole thread of meaning attaches and it rolls into conceptual reality. And part of what that conceptual reality is your expectation of the outcome of the interaction that you're having. And those early conditioning pieces go all the way back to that infant caregiver dyadic experience, and what you imagine is possible is based on what the early experience of what happened to you. Is that making sense? If you had a caregiver that showed up reliably, that you didn't worry about it, then when you form a sense of reality where the attachment system is activated, what you do automatically is seek out people who will be protective of you and who will comfort and soothe you. and your expectation is that they will be available to you. That's what happens. And it's an astonishingly low bar in terms of what that is, which is 30% of the time or more. Now, where did that figure come from? It came from Mary Ainsworth and her team of postdocs going into the homes of the people that they tested in the strain situation and spending tens of thousands of hours of monitoring the interaction between caregiver and infant or caregiver and child, understand how the caregivers needed to respond in order for the child to feel a sense of safety, a sense of protection, and a sense that their needs will be responded to. And then if you don't have that experience in infancy, you develop a different model of what you can expect from the people that will be responsive to you in the situation of your attachment system activating. In the childhood experience of someone who's neglected, who consistently has an inadequate response from their caregiver, they don't anticipate that somebody will help them, and so they don't really even look for somebody to help them. They imagine that they're going to have to do it on their own, and so they look for strategies that they'll be able to institute on their own. Preoccupied people have the preoccupied children have the experience of sometimes the caregiver responds in a meaningful way, but most of the time they don't. And the child can't predict when the caregiver is going to respond adequately. And that completely shapes the way that they respond to the environment, which is an experience of, if I just ask in the right way, the caregiver will be responsive to me. They have the capacity to respond to me. I just have to figure out how to trigger the caring response. And so they go through iterations of demand to try and get the care they need. Disorganized kids have the experience of the caregiver being the source of fearfulness, so that when their attachment system activates and they seek proximity to the caregiver, the fight or flight mechanism activates and prevents them from getting the comfort and soothing from the caregiver, because the caregiver is the source of fearfulness. So imagine the caregiver does something that activates your attachment system, which is you needing protection and care, but it's the caregiver who is the source of the activation. And so when the attachment system compels you to seek proximity, then the fight or flight mechanism cancels that out. So disorganized people not only don't expect to have their needs met, they expect to be harmed if they express them. Is that making sense? And then when that translates into adult relationships, of course, and we have this view of secure people think that their needs are reasonable and that people will be responsive to them. And so when they have a need, they express it to somebody with the expectation that that person will be responsive to them. Dismissing people, so anxious avoidant children become dismissing adults. They're at the core of their being is this terrible sadness and bitterness that their needs are never going to be met by somebody willingly. And so the expectation that they have is that they're going to have to transact, they're going to have to trade with somebody to get their needs met. The sadness and bitterness is so unbearable that they tend to inflate themselves in a sense of being the best. They tend to think of themselves lacking any evidence to support the point of view that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they think everybody else, this is the devaluing mechanism. So in idealizing, of course, there's the inflation and the absence of negativity, but they think everybody else is inadequate. How do you explain to yourself as a child that no matter what you do, it doesn't elicit a response to your needs, and that in fact what you have to do is present a very idealized, inflated expression of what's happening to your caregiver to get any response from them? You explain that to yourself by saying that you have these needs, but other people aren't capable of meeting them, and that's why they don't, rather than they're withholding from you the care that you need. Is that making sense? Preoccupied people think that there's something wrong with them, that people aren't responsive to them. But if they just attach themselves to somebody else, they can get the care that they need. So there's some, in that model, secure people think they're good and they think other people are good. Dismissing people think they're good and other people are bad. Preoccupied people think they're bad and other people are good. And then disorganized people think that there's something fundamentally wrong, that they're damaged goods. And then they think everybody else is out to get them. So in that constellation, they're bad and everybody else is also bad. Is that making sense? So that when you begin to operate in conflict, remember that conflict often activates the attachment system. What activates are these points of view that you then engage in, understanding the nature of reality. At a level of mentalizing that you can see and compare with that activity of this is what I've sensed, this is what I've made, this is what I've sensed, this is what I've made. If you can mentalize fast enough, you don't get caught in these rigid perceptions of things so much. So you understand, that is to say, you mentalize that process. This is what I've sensed, this is what I've made. I've made the meaning, which is based on the conditions of the present moment, but also the conditioning that I've had. So in recognizing the pattern of experience or the way that I've selected it and assigned meaning to it, I understand that this is the present moment informed by my conditioned meaning of that. Is that making sense? It's that interesting dilemma of the human condition where we're in the present moment, but the present moment is infused with the meanings of our lifetime of experience in that kind of situation. Is that making sense? What's a popular idiom for that? Oh, here we go again. Do you know that one? Where you've made the meaning like it's in the past. And what comes with that, oh, here we go again, is the expectation of what the outcome of that situation is going to be. So a non-mentalizing version of that. But if you understand the meaning that you've assigned to the sensing experience that you've gathered in the present moment, the next thing you want to do is understand how to express that to somebody. And this is essentially the idea of conflict resolution, right? We can get into these rigid patterns of understanding what's happening, and part of that rigidity is our anticipation of what's going to happen as a result of the meaning that we've made. And we can respond in the present moment as if that outcome has already happened, right? You've rejected me is the dismissing version of that. You're going to harm me is the disorganized version of that. And so you respond in the present moment as if that's happened, rather than expressing your experience of what's happening in the present moment and allowing the person that you're engaged with to respond to it and understand their response. So in that secure mapping of mentalizing, you understand the meaning that you're giving to the moment that you're in. You're understanding what about that you want to express to someone else. You express it to them and you make sure that they understand what you mean. And then they respond to you and you make sure that you understand what they mean. So you validated it twice, right? They understand what you mean and you understand what they mean, and then you modify your understanding of the relationship between you. That would be an adequate level of mentalizing. But if you can't mentalize fast enough and you get stuck in these rigid representations of what's happening, then you're acting as if your anticipation of what's going to happen is what's going to happen. And you respond in a defensive way based on that. Is that making sense? Now, the conflict resolution strategies is we really talk about the mentalizing capacity of attachment in these three distinct periods of life. The first is that 0 to 3. What do you know about 0 to 3? Nothing. You don't remember it. However, you behave based on what that conditioning is, so you can track what must have happened. You can know with a good level of certainty what must have happened to you based on the way that you respond, because the patterns are so clear. This is thanks to Mary Ainsworth, right? In mid-childhood, we show up at the playground, and this is really where these rigid views, we call them fixed views in Buddhism, these expectations of what you can expect to happen. One of the features of humans is that in every environment you walk into, you create almost instantly a hierarchy of your social value based on who's there. So you create a social hierarchy and then you peg yourself where you are in the social standing. And a lot of that comes from that mid-childhood period where you show up on the playground. That wonderful, innocent child that you are shows up at the playground and are confronted with all of these conflict systems from everybody's family, right? You know how to solve conflict by watching the adults in your family solve conflicts, how they do. And then you show up on the playground and you think that that's how conflicts are solved. And then you meet all of these kids and they all have the same idea, that the way conflicts are resolved in their family are the way conflicts are resolved. And so how'd you do, right? Did you show up on the playground and everybody thought that you were great and invited you into their groups? I grew up in the Chicago area, and the social hierarchy of elementary school was based on how well you could play games, right? That was the main thing. There wasn't much in the way of there was, I suppose, a few kids that were academically inclined even in elementary school, but it did not have a great deal of social status. I look at my godkids, for instance, and being competitive in learning is a feature that was absent really in my child. It's a total feature now, and I think, and that it's correlated really to the tech revolution. I think that there's a whole avenue that people imagine for that was completely not part of my upbringing. So as you can imagine, looking at you now, that I was in far left field for most of my childhood, which was actually okay. I couldn't hand-eye coordination is not one of my things. But it also diminished my social standing in school, and mainly that was confusing to me. I think that I had a kind of naive approach to the social hierarchy. I also grew up in a family where the rules of social hierarchy were constantly violated, so I didn't really didn't have a strong need to follow the rules either, which was also not so useful. But what happened to you, and what did you do in you clawing your way to the top of elementary school? It's funny, this human thing, isn't it? Particularly in a capitalist society, how the tokens of success are so tangible. Most of us in mid-childhood are going to settle into this agreement of how we're going to be in the family system, and we go along with that pretty well. It has to be really chaotic or really difficult for a child not to want to do that. And then when you hit puberty and that transformation of your brain happens, a child's brain is just this warren of axons that just can glob onto information really fast, but it makes cognitive functioning really slow. And so it's pruned back to the already connected, and everything that isn't connected is lost, which dramatically increases your capacity to reflect on things, but makes learning much slower. And in that moment, when the cognitive mind begins to develop, you begin to reflect on the agreements that you made in your family system. And if you determine that the caregivers had your interest in mind, and actually the agreements were meant to be helpful to you, then the epistemic trust is maintained. So epistemic trust is where you believe that somebody has your interest, and you believe what they're telling you is truthful and meant to be helpful to you. It's how we learn from somebody. And if that changes, where you determine that the agreements that they made with you and the things that they did were actually in their interest at your expense, then the epistemic trust breaks, and you don't trust them anymore, and you can't learn from them anymore. So you'll notice that some kids rely on their caregiver, and the relationship shifts from that protective caregiver into the mentorship relationship with your caregivers. And for the kids who recognize that the caregivers did not provide for them what they needed, and that it was at great expense to them, they begin to distance themselves from those relationships. But it's really at that point when also the sex drive activates in you, that you're then looking for intimate experiences with other people beyond the capacity of a child relationship. And that's really when this conflict, the understanding of your conflict system and their conflict system is paramount. Jules?
Hey, George. When you were just saying about puberty and people start to make that distinction around epistemic trust, is that in an attachment context? So, like, if say my early attachment conditioning is avoidant, then by the time I get to puberty, am I am I noticing that the attachment stuff I got from my parents was actually not at my expense? I mean, it was at my expense in their interest because that's all they had to give me.
Well, in the experience of an avoidant child would be some it's a little bit complex. So I want to make it simple. If you had caregivers and your obligation to idealize the relationship was something that you could do reliably, then you would understand that if you idealize, they'll be responsive to you. You might continue to think of your childhood as the perfect childhood, that you had ideal parents and that all of your needs were met. And then you would go out into the world, and even as an adult, you would say that that was true. And there would be no occasion that you would then reflect on what happened. It's only when you begin to see over the course of your teen years and in your 20s that these patterns in relationship happen over and over again, where your capacity to be intimate is not available to you. The relationships are quite transactional. Dismissing people typically form relationships with preoccupied people, and it's the second most common coupling. And some of those relationships are very stable and productive for pursuing the kind of life you have in mind. It's just not intimate. And so if you have a longing to be seen and to be understood and to be cared for as a whole person and not the role that you've agreed upon with the other person, then you'll feel a deficit in the relationship, which you may then pursue filling outside of the relationship, so that you'll notice dismissing people often have other avenues of expression, which are secret from their primary relationship. It's a very typical pattern. But if it's more extreme than that, and you're not able to form any kind of stable coupling and you're mostly alone, that would create the impetus to begin to reflect on what actually happened. And then you would be able to see more clearly what happened. And by and large, dismissing people have the capacity to reflect if they put their interest and attention on it. Is that making sense?
So the phenomenon that you're talking about when you're saying that happens at puberty, when we make that epistemic trust evaluation, is that related to what you're talking about or different?
No, if the conditions of your childhood were good enough, even though you developed an avoidance strategy, you might go into your adult life and not need to reflect on it, because it doesn't interfere with you getting the things that you want. It's only if it was bad enough that you can't do that. The main impetus for people to reflect on their attachment conditioning is that it interferes with your capacity to have a meaningful life.
Okay.
And that's true of all of the attachment strategies. Really, it just manifests differently based on what your conditioning is. Dismissing people, by the time you reach your mid-30s, right? If you haven't formed a relationship, 7 out of 10 of the single people that you're going to encounter are going to be dismissing. It's one of the things that makes dating in the adult world so challenging, right? And most of them are not interested in forming an intimate relationship. So if that's what you want, it's going to be hard to do. Disorganized people, on the other hand, by the time they're in their mid-30s, they're so disappointed and confused about how relationships go, they actually withdraw from trying to form relationships. So they just abandon the whole idea of having relationships. And what they attempt to do is live on their own without relying on anyone. The danger there is if you succeed in figuring out how to live on your own without needing other people, which you can do, it makes it really hard to try and form relationships because you don't rely on anyone for what you can get from another relationship, and to use the resources to support those relationships, which are just confusing and disappointing, interferes with the other things in life that actually you value. And so you become less and less motivated to attempt to get it to work. That makes sense. The last piece I need to bring in here is forgiveness. And one of the things about forgiveness is how you hold other people's participation in the relation and the conflict resolution. An inability to forgive is really associated with control, I think, mainly. Controlling behavior. A secure stance might be to make a brilliant plan and then to do what happens, really understanding in a balanced way that, plans work sometimes. Sometimes they go really well. Sometimes they don't go so well. Sometimes you can't fulfill the plan and you have to abandon and adapt to what the conditions are, and that is a fairly balanced understanding of the way the world works. Dismissing people tend to be driven more by rejection, and they tend to be more geared toward this idealizing, devaluing model. Things are great, things are terrible, but they demand that things be perceived in the way that they perceive them. In preoccupation, the control aspect is not about a devaluing of the whole person. That's a very typically dismissing thing. Derogating, devaluing. You're not worth anything is a dismissing response. But I can't forgive you for what you did is a preoccupied response. If something goes wrong and a controlling preoccupied magically produces this list of epic length of every violation of everything that you've done wrong, and it's used in some ways as a cudgel to get you to respond in the way that they want. So in that conflict attachment thing, it represents a kind of control. Now, the way out of that control, of course, is to see that you're creating the perception of the world in that way and to move out of it. And then it really does relate to how you hold the experience of it in relationship to the habit of generating the self-experience. Sometimes forgiveness takes on the sense that I'm in charge of everything. I'm in control of everything. That produces a sense of you being the source of problem, in which case the voice is often, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. This is also associated with avoidant people, but less the organized version. Forgive me, I forgive you. Just that sense of holding responsibility can be avoidant in that sense. Avoidant people control through bullying more than they control through nitpicking, which is how I think of preoccupied control. That makes sense. Forgive me, I forgive you, I forgive myself is the shorthand for the forgiveness practice. And that again is related to that self-experience. Do you hold the version of yourself that you are now differently than you hold the version of yourself in the past? Is that making sense? I'm trying to do it really fast because we're out of time to talk about it. Everybody okay? Why don't we do some meditation? What do you think? What would you like to do? Insight, heart practice, or IPF?
Insight.
Okay. So go ahead and take your meditation posture. Okay, let go of the meditation. How's that? So what's coming up in February is a meditation in addiction level 1. It's going to be on 3 Saturdays, February 14th, 21st, and 28th. We have a meditation and attachment level 2 starting on Friday, February 20th, and that will be 10:30 to 12:30 from now until June. And then we have a workshop on the third Tuesday. I don't think we have a topic yet, but we have a once a month lunchtime gathering, which is the third Tuesday. So that's February 17th. And then we have Kaleidoscope this month as well. The Kaleidoscope topic is nurturing mature intimacy and relational depth. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope if you can, you'll make a donation to us. There's a link on the website to do it. Any amount is helpful to me and also to the work that we're doing. Really appreciate you, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks.
If you're struggling with addiction or have in the past, I invite you to check out my free video on how to heal from addiction. You'll learn about the distinct attachment repair approach to addiction recovery that we offer here at Mettagroup, and how this approach differs from other forms of addiction support like 12-step programs, rehab, or even therapy. If you're finding that persistent anger, frustration, resentment, and shame consume your life, or you're stuck in dysfunctional cycles that keep your life small, then check out this resource. If you struggle with substance abuse or process addiction, this is for you. Sign up for free at mettagroup.org/addiction or head to the link below.